Marco Polo's Legacy, Road to the Celestial Empire, is a fantasy, semi-historical campaign setting using the openly licensed rules for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. It was created by the team from Acheron, the same folks from Italy who have made 5e campaigns using inspiration from Dante's Inferno, the Bible's Book of Revelation, a game with original rules using mystic ancient Rome, and an award-winning game that uses whimsical fantasy Italy. In the case of Marco Polo, they draw inspiration from the famous travelogue of Marco Polo, a Venetian merchant and explorer who set out in 1271 as a 17-year-old with his father and uncle onto the Silk Road, and didn't return home until 24 years later when he retold the stories of his travels to a writer named Rustichello de Pisa. He wasn't the first European to travel to China, but he was the first to light up the Western world with truly vibrant mental images of the exotic East. But Marco Polo's descriptions of all the civilizations he encountered on the Silk Road contained more than just exotic Middle Eastern, Central, and East Asian societies, large and small. He made a number of references to magic and fantastical creatures and a dark society trying to summon a dark force. This is what has inspired the team at Acheron to make a fantasy RPG adaptation. It runs on the premise that everything Marco Polo hinted at was true. In this video, I want to walk you through the free quick start for Marco Polo's Legacy, Road to the Celestial Empire, and discuss the elements I think are the most innovative with regard to how they change and add to the 5e rules. And in the end, also share with you my honest opinion about the overall project and a list of things I hope to see in the final product. At the time of recording, the full campaign setting is crowdfunding on Kickstarter. There's a link down below. Let's jump into the quick start. There are a few major things that define this setting. The first is that it takes place in a fantastical version of 1324, the year in which Marco Polo has just died at the age of 60 in his hometown of Venice. The second is that he was, and your player is, a member of the Brotherhood of the Guardian Merchants, a secretive trading guild whose secret mission is to protect, study, and safeguard magical artifacts. And the third is that the setting aims to tell tales in the tradition of the wuxia genre, which is a distinct Chinese mix of martial arts and chivalry. In wuxia tales, quote, men and women of humble origins follow personal codes of honor, avenging wrongs, using their strength to protect the oppressed, and breaking the law in the name of justice. A fourth major feature of this setting is that the existence of the supernatural is a commonplace fact. You don't see magic and magical beasts every day, but everyone eventually witnesses it in their lifetime. The source of that magic is kind of a mix between arcane and divine. The more important feature is that the magic is seen as a moral act, never meant to be used lightly. There is actually some mechanical enforcement of this notion, and I'll show you that in a minute. At least according to this quick start, the setting has a main set of good guys who come in the form of the Brotherhood of the Guardian Merchants, and a set of big bad guys, the Four Perils. The Guardian Merchants are a network of mostly supernatural gifted humans called Starchosen who work a spy and trade network up and down the Silk Road and who masquerade as normal traders. The Four Perils are former generals and sorcerers who transformed themselves into bloodthirsty demons, but who were defeated and imprisoned 2,000 years ago. These four mythical creatures are all pulled from Chinese mythology, and there's a whole cult of raiders and assassins who are trying to free these Four Perils. Here's something that I really love. It says the characters in your game here start at level 3. This is such an obvious and direct acknowledgement that D&D 5e can be a bit of a slog for the first couple of levels. They're just skipping past that and getting you jump started in the action a bit faster here. The in-setting rationale is that the Brotherhood only recruits expert adventurers, so your PC has always had a bit of adventuring under their belts by the time they get started here. It says here that the common language across the lands is actually Mongolian, which makes sense. It was the Mongolian Genghis Khan who established this so-called Celestial Empire. It's actually a bit of a complex situation because the empire is also called the Great Khanate or the Yuan Empire, but the lands are actually divided into 3 Khanates, the Golden Horde, the Il Khanate, and the Chagatai Khanate. My biggest question here is if any of these historical details will actually matter in the course of play. In order to make this setting really sing, the GM at least, and preferably all the players, should have some knowledge of 14th century history in this half of the world. But depending on where you're from and your level of education and spheres of interest, you may know nothing about this time and place. Or on the other hand, you or someone at the table may know too much about it. It's a tricky thing to balance with quasi-historical settings like this. Anyway, whether it's true or not, the legacy of Genghis Khan is that he was extremely brutal in establishing his massive empire, but that he ran a civilization that had surprisingly low crime and an efficient bureaucracy. In this setting, though, you have to contend with demons and shapeshifters who lurk not only along the Silk Road, but in the alleyways of cities. So real quick, if you enjoy this kind of content and you want to keep it coming, you can support the channel by pledging $2 to $5 or whatever on the official Dave Thaumavore RPG Reviews Patreon. The perks are really secondary to the support, but I do have a members only Discord open to all supporters, and that's really where I share all kinds of behind the scenes stuff and more private opinions about games and the gaming industry. The Patreon Discord is also where I hear your thoughts and suggestions the loudest and the clearest. So if you want to support this kind of content, maybe have a hand in guiding it a little, join the Patreon and then join the Discord. Okay, so going back to having historical knowledge for a second, this is what I mean. No one really knows who established the Silk Road, so you can kind of hand wave that, but it would really help to know what was being traded up and down that road. I hope the main book includes a full and thorough list of goods, which include things like cotton, pearls, magic stones, carpets, hides, wool, horses, etc. These items are the sort of fabric of the setting. If a GM can effectively evoke the presence of these items, their variety, their appearance, their value to different people at different points along the Silk Road, then a foundational detail of the setting can be achieved. There's one other major thing to point out here. The fact is, this is probably the biggest mechanical detail in the entire campaign setting. A short rest requires 8 hours of rest, and a long rest requires 7 days of calm. This has a lot of implications in a game like D&D 5e. Basically, you can't engage in back-to-back combat, you can't spam your spells, and you can't abuse any of your abilities that require rests to recharge. This little paragraph basically reforms the entire game into a gritty, realistic environment where combat is largely to be avoided and magic and special abilities are used sparingly. Which is to say, bravo! This is exactly the kind of rules tweak that makes 5e an interesting and engaging game, at least for me personally. Alright, like I mentioned, the Brotherhood of the Guardian Merchants recruits their members from any identifiable Starchosen, and here's basically what that means. As a Starchosen, you were born under certain celestial and star signs. If you ever used to go to Chinese restaurants back in the 80s and 90s in the US, you'll recognize these. Also, they're a big deal in actual Chinese culture. And if you've ever read the horoscope section in the paper, back when they used to print newspapers on physical paper, you'd recognize these. Am I just showing my age here? Anyway, you can roll 2d12 or choose one sign from each of these lists, and you'll get a couple of ability score bonuses as well as a skill proficiency. There's this one mechanic that sort of replaces the default 5e inspiration. Astral influence will give you 2 personality traits, one for each of your horoscope signs. And anytime you activate this influence by characterizing your action in a way that matches the influence, you get advantage on that roll. But with a couple of restrictions. You can only apply advantage in this way to ability checks, attack rolls, or saving throws. And you can only use it once per long rest. That long rest being a week in game time, if you recall. By the way, it says you can still use traditional inspiration points if you want. I say why not? That's not a mechanic that really sways the game one way or the other, and it's mostly just rewarding for players. This quick start contains 4 new subclasses for the Barbarian, Rogue, Monk, and Warlock. The full book will contain 1 new subclass for each of the 12 classes. This isn't a particularly generous reimagining of the classes in 5e, but on the other hand, I appreciate the tidiness and focus. Quality over quantity is the idea, I presume. There are also 4 new backgrounds included here. These each come with some traits that are basically extra spells or superhuman abilities, but are also used for narrative flavor, and obviously that's pretty important in a distinctive campaign setting such as this one. I'm looking forward to reading the extended description of each of these in the full book. Let's go through each of these 4 subclasses real quick though. The first is a Templar exile for barbarians. As the story goes, the Templar order protected pilgrims traveling to and from the Holy Lands. Think Jerusalem and that region of the world. But after a few centuries, a French king dismantled the order and executed a lot of these Templars, but some of them survived, including you, and now as a Templar exile, you're a rageaholic who can channel superhuman fury. Each of these 4 subclasses comes as a pre-generated character you can use in the sample adventure at the end of the quick start, and we actually have to consult the pre-gen character sheet to see what a Templar exile can do. By the way, this is a really well-designed 5e character sheet. Notice how the skills are all sorted under their related core attribute, and combat stats are all centrally placed in these large, distinctive cells. Anyway, a Templar exile has rage, obviously, but also these various and sundry features. These abilities come from the Heir of Marco Polo background, so any PC could have these at the jump. This pre-gen is a sort of well-rounded combat adventure build, to be honest. Nothing jumping out at me. The Master of Shadow is your rogue subclass. The story here is that the evil cult or tribe called the Karaunas kidnap little kids and train them up in the use of dark magic, including the manipulation of shadows. But some of these recruits manage to escape and eventually find their way into the Brotherhood of Guardian Merchants. As far as your superpowers, starting at level 3, these are actually pretty interesting. You have a cloaking shadow that follows you around, and you can see in darkness. The Monk of Internal Alchemy is your monastic subclass. The situation in this empire is the fact that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of martial arts schools or sects. Some really tiny and others much larger. It remains to be seen how much the authors are going to devote to describing how these sects operate and what they're like, but it really sounds like a job for a series of random generation tables. Anyway, your monk here channels chi, of course, to achieve superhuman feats of martial arts. The monk's superpowers involve having that same economy of key points that are spent to use powers in 5e, but they're called chi points. You can spend a couple of chi points to add damage to an attack, advantage on stealth checks, triple your carry and move capacity, or add a few points to an improvised weapon attack. You also get a proficiency bonus for using a GN, which surprisingly you can buy a kind of nice one on Amazon for like $160. Link down below. Okay, the last subclass included in this quick start is the Warlock of the Pact of the 10 Kings. The story here is that the souls of vile creatures are sometimes able to escape death and reincarnation, and they hide in the mortal world and cause all kinds of problems. But there are these kings of the underworld who have granted certain mortals the power to see and manipulate spirits. These warlocks are tasked with tracking and capturing these evil spirits and bringing them back into the cycle of life and death. Superpowers include being able to perceive fiends, undead, and ethereal creatures within 60 feet. You can't be spooked by fiends or undead. You have advantage on death saving throws, and you can summon a so-called hungry ghost, which will do your bidding, especially in combat. These hungry ghosts get tougher and tougher as you increase your warlock class level, and they have lots of resistances and immunities. They also get one of 6 random little features here. I thought that was a nice touch. So there's this one other really interesting featured mechanic in this setting called Ars Mercatoria. It's basically a structured series of opposed ability checks that is meant to simulate a very important debate, negotiation, or parlay of some sort. There's a bit of gambling here where each side chooses a representative to do the talking, and those characters each choose one of 4 skills in secret. Depending on which skill is paired against which, advantage is awarded to one side. The way it's structured is that after a few rolls of the dice, one side will be victorious either by a margin of 1, 2, or 3. This margin of victory will determine the nature and severity of the outcome. There's an example of a set of outcomes in the sample adventure at the end of the quick start, but I really hope that they offer some extensive guidance for GMs on how to handle outcomes of different situations with the different margins of victory. Overall, a very cool addition to the rules, almost a necessary one really, because the harsh recovery rules can't have you always fighting big fights to solve every problem in the story. And finally, there's the sample adventure. It spans 5 scenes and a finale. I think you could probably get through this one in one session if the GM is good at corralling players. I don't want to spoil the actual adventure, but I will say that it's pretty combat oriented, as is expected from a 5e setting scenario, and it introduces all the elements of the larger meta narrative that the authors are pushing. That of an overarching struggle between major factions and major named villains. I can't stress enough how impactful those longer short and long rests are on the overall play experience. Let me just list out what having an 8-hour short rest and a 7-day long rest does to the game. No back-to-back combat. Players have to carefully assess every fight's risk and reward. Healing resources stretched thin. Potions and healing spells become more critical. General resource conservation. Everything that comes from fast and easy rests is restricted now. Spell slots, class abilities, and HP all have to be managed with care and precision. Players have to adapt to a slow-burning pace rather than explosive Nova-style approaches. Heightened tension. The scarcity of recovery means every decision carries more weight. Encourages strategic thinking, exploration, and diplomacy over combat encounters. Puts more emphasis on survival skills such as medicine and nature. Martial classes like monks and rogues are actually more valuable in the sense that they have more consistent damage output, which is critical when you need to kill enemies before they put too much damage on you. Spellcasters are less appealing. They have a lot less spell slot availability, which reduces their usefulness. The spells in this setting do not seem to have been buffed in any way, so you're getting the same caliber of magic, but can use it far less often. Overall, it's just a masterstroke to change the rests like this. But here are my overall thoughts on the whole project so far. Pros. Fun reimagining of world literature. I really appreciate how much Acheron draws from classical and world literature to make their campaign settings. Just reading this quick start has dropped me down the rabbit hole of researching Marco Polo, and it's really a fascinating and rewarding journey so far. Making his story into a playable fantasy world makes perfect sense. Starts at level 3. I like the acknowledgement here that 5e at levels 1 and 2 are boring and kind of pointless. The creators here just want to get the party started, and the party starts at level 3. Harsh recovery rules. As discussed a minute ago, this tweak to the rules aligns with the campaign's goal of being semi-historical and set in our world, and it gives everyone room to refocus their energy on diplomacy, stealth, and strategy, which are definitely the kinds of things that a secret society of guardian merchants would be doing on the Silk Road in the 1300s. Dramatic bargaining mechanic. The Ars Mercatoria challenges are a way to create a meaningful, dramatic negotiation scene that doesn't rely at all on combat. These challenges aren't meant to be used more than once or twice in a session, but they carry enough tension and dice rules to serve as a significant encounter in the story. Cons. Is it mostly Chinese? The universal language in this setting is Mongolian, and the whole sprawling empire that you're walking around in was founded by Genghis Khan, a Mongol, yet the setting seems to present itself largely through Chinese characters and terms, even though 13th and 14th century Mongols used the Uyghur script to write their language. There's a bit of xenophilia present in this setting, maybe even foundationally, since it states outright that they're trying to do a wuxia setting, that Chinese style of storytelling centered around martial arts and chivalry. And then there's the big bads of the whole setting, the 4 perils, who are pulled directly from Chinese classic literature. That's all fine, but honestly, I would have liked to have seen a little more Mongolian script, terminology, and culture weaved into this setting. If you're well read on the subject of the Yuan Empire, please let me know your thoughts down in the comments. So there are a few things that I would like to see in the final setting materials, a pronunciation guide. I mean, if we're doing what I presume is Mandarin or classical Chinese for most of the exotic terminology in this setting, let's get half a page or a full page explaining how to pronounce this stuff. And if it's more than just Chinese, then let's go all out and explain how to pronounce that stuff too. This setting can be a useful gateway to learning a world of real-life cultures and languages. Mongol stuff. Like I mentioned earlier, it would be cool to get more Mongolian language, culture, and folklore weaved into the setting. Robust list of magical relics. So the quick start describes the Brotherhood of the Guardian Merchants' main mission as that of protecting and studying magical artifacts of diverse origins. I thought this was a perfect opportunity to create a huge library of magical items and artifacts for players to strive to find, own, and use. These items could each exude real history and culture and generally add a lot to the setting, and I would love to see an illustration for every one. Depiction of the paper money. It's a widely touted fact that paper money was used in the East centuries before the Western world adopted it. I would love to see some depictions of this money, and bonus points if the bills were printable at home. Imagine having double-sided color printouts of the Khanate money being thrown around at the table. It would be amazing. Village and town generator. Obviously, I'd want to see a gazetteer of some of the more notable villages, towns, and cities that are cited in Marco Polo's Travels book, but it could be immensely useful for a GM to also have a town generator with maybe 10 or 15 tables that could also help them generate small quests or conflicts to throw at players. A world of factions. I'd love to see a whole panoply of different factions described. It's hinted at in the quick start that there are at least a few distinct factions. You have the Brotherhood of Guardian Merchants, of course, and the Evo Karaunas, and there is mention of countless monastic sects, each of varying size and influence, as well as the dragons, who are largely good and somehow have desk jobs that they get bored of. I'd really like to know more about them, but generally speaking, the more factions, the better. Maybe throw in a few European factions as well. A list of pop culture touchstones. I can't help but think that the campaign's creator, Samuel Marola, was at least partially inspired by Netflix's Marco Polo show, which spanned 2 seasons and gave us a very violent, sexy interpretation of Silk Road adventuring. But more than just what inspired Samuel, I'd love to see a list of books, movies, TV shows, and other media that a GM and players can use to build a visual and maybe audio library that can get them into the mindset of the 14th century Orient. Actually, the soundtrack for the Netflix show is a good place to start, as well as the show itself, and obviously Marco Polo's original travel book, which is freely available online and as an audiobook in many places on YouTube. To be fair, there is a short list of books mentioned on page 6 of the quick start, but I just want more. You know, with these quick starts, I always end up with more questions than answers. I really need to see how they handle the other 8 subclasses, for example, and I need to see what the spells look like and what kind of magical relics are on offer. The magic items are particularly important in this setting because they're the MacGuffins that you're going to be stuffing into every story, so they need to be cool. I guess we'll see. I've left links for everything down below. Be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments and subscribe and all that. I'll see ya.